Guys, tonight we're diving back into an odd piece of history. One where individuals went to sleep, or at least attempted to, encapsulated by rigid etiquette, herbal remedies, and moral concerns. You're sneaking through the dark, gaslit alleys of Victorian Britain in hushed tones, and behind every tightly pulled curtain is an individual desperately attempting to fall asleep with assistance from steamed lettuce, a dash of a teaspoon of sherry, or if they're fortunate, some mighty soft socks. No noise, no nonsense, and no nodding off before finishing your prayers. Unless nodding off during your prayers was your habit, in which case, congratulations, you were living the dream Victorian style. But you had to earn your sleep. You had to put on specially approved night clothes, arrange your bedroom for spiritual harmony, and perhaps avoid thinking about the empire too hard, lest your dreams become politically inconvenient. You will never make it through this world without receiving a passive-aggressive remark regarding your pillow filling. Fortunately, you're only a guest here, and you can leave in the morning. So, settle down a bit, but take a brief moment to subscribe and like the video, only if you absolutely love doing what I'm doing here. Let me know down in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Hopefully you're asleep or about to be. So dim our lights. Maybe pull out a fan for that soft background hum. And let's gradually ease ourselves into tonight's ride together. You walk alongside, smelling the residue of coal smoke and orange peel slush in the gutters. A lamplighter nods at you sleepily as he hoists his long pole upward, igniting another flickering halo above the slick cobblestones. Evening has tipped over into what Victorians sometimes called God's watch hours. The dark, in-between time when the respectable are supposed to be in bed. The dishonest are probably snoring on ale-soaked barrels, and the very rich are entertaining themselves by doing neither. The empire may cover the globe, but here, in this city, in these quiet parlors and creaking corridor beds, is a nightly ritual almost as ostentatious as a tea service, almost as caffeination-free. Perhaps, you walk by windows where oil lamps cast an amber murk. Women behind some pull their hair up with meticulous care. Others recite psalms in spasmodic murmurs as children nod off with heads down, petunia-like. If you're rich, you're maybe getting ready for bed with a cup of chamomile tisane and a puffy eiderdown. If you're poor, you're probably still at work, or asleep in mid-sentence. And regardless of your position in society, one thing is true: sleep is a serious, discussed subject. It's medical, it's moral, and in good Victorian tradition, it's terribly, acutely embarrassing. It's the 1800s that people get anxious about their sleep in earnest. It's no longer something that happens to you, it's something you have to manage. And everybody has a dictum about how to get it right, including some men who didn't recognize a pillow if it puffed them into their face. Mainstream sleep theories then borrowed their fair portion from Christian theology, humoral medicine, early psychology, and a dash of "my aunt once told me." You, however, will be commanded to be acquainted with your dashes, your devotions prior to sleep, and which side of bed is most effective in warding off sin. Consider Reverend Jabez Burns, a benign if slightly censorious clergyman who preached public sermons about bad moral hygiene resulting in fetid sleep habits. He even went so far as to insinuate that sleepers who slept with messy rooms were receptive to impure dreaming. Be warned. That vacant water glass beside your bed? Victorian taboo. But rich homes had pre-bedtime routines so elaborate you'd swear they called for calling up spirits. Which, they sometimes did. More affluent Victorians sometimes would have mediums to evening sittings in the drawing. Were they looking for companionship? Or to stay up longer than they should with hopes the ether would quiet them down? Sleeping was, in that world, a publicly private performance. We all knew you did it, but how you did it became a signifier about who you were, disciplined or lazy, pious or profane. If your sleep patterns weren't right, predictable, and quiet, then something in your character obviously was unraveling. And insomniacs, good heavens, they were looked upon with a most fascinating mixture of pity and suspicion. One thing, a heart which couldn't sleep was obviously tormented by moral or religious shortcomings. But then again, wasn't suffering romantic? Just a little bit? Insomniacs, especially men of letters, were sometimes blissfully exempt from condemnation. "Poor Tennyson can't sleep," they'd whisper. "He's sensitive." But good luck if you were a sleepless servant. Then you were accused of indulging to excess, laziness, gossiping, or something even more serious, idleness. Insomnia wasn't yet a medical term. At times, it was a defect in one's character. Nonetheless, humans did their best to come up with a solution. Packed among the pages within 1,000 pages of advised volumes, most authored by people who'd slept fitfully since the Crimean War, you'd find tips both remarkably sentimental and extremely effective, like sprinkle a bit of lavender on your pillowcase, set your head to true west, rub goose grease into your temples, and, of course, drink boiled lettuce water, to which we will shortly pay a visit. Much too soon. But tonight, in this moment, you're safe. You glide through the quiet, imaginary cobbled streets, past chimney pots and rain-wet shutters. You're wrapped in wool, your shoes leave barely a sound. Somewhere, a bad poet is humming himself to sleep on a scratched escritoire. Elsewhere, a baker mumbles pre-dawn dreams of flour and cinnamon. And you, lucky, sleepy you, get to watch the age unspool its bedtime rituals like a long, soothing scarf. Slightly itchy, absurdly perfumed, but undeniably warm. So let's tuck ourselves inside now. Not into bed just yet, but into the deeper folds of the age. Let's stand at the threshold of rooms both grand and modest, stuffy and soot-filled, where sleep is not just welcomed, but worked toward. You're going to want to have the proper tea, the proper ointment, the proper prayers silent pseudo-scholarship hand. First, however, let's present your doctor to you. He has some very questionable sleep tips. You go to a doctor, not one of those high-tech men with latex gloves and overhead lighting rigs, but a Victorian gent with elaborate sideburns, an alarming interest in your movements, and a penchant for prescribing mercury with a stern expression. He tips his hat to you and insinuates your sleeplessness is owing to your overstimulated nerves, or possibly an imbalance of the black bile. You nod slowly, mostly because you don't wish to offend him into treating you with leeches. Behind him, papers plaster the walls, medical broadsides, herblore scrolls, spiritualist society newsletters, one horrifying sketch of a man nodding off seated upon a goat. You don't ask. It was both sublimely easy and diabolically complex, according to Victorian physicians. On one hand, you required it as a coal stove does fuel. On the other hand, your timing, duration, quality, and spiritual purity of sleep had to be precisely right, or else you might fall to the wrong side of history's most fragile diagnosis: nervous exhaustion. You hear this phrase repeated constantly, as if it were a national pastime. Nervous exhaustion got blamed for everything from forgetfulness and upset stomachs to fainting spells and melancholia. Unsurprisingly, insomnia was folded right into it. If your brain refused to shut off, something was unbalanced. Bad air, impure thoughts, too much time spent reading poetry with tinges of French influence. All valid culprits. But here's the surprising part. Doctors didn't agree about what to do about it. You'd be advised to give valerian root a shot. Another would insist upon a rigid course of cold tubs with dry brushing the extremities with a hard boar bristle brush. A third would advise against dozing off during sermons, even if the pulpiteer was rambling on about the Book of Numbers for the third Sunday running. And distinctions between medical counsel and family folklore were fainter than your eyes after a dinner sherry. You could be advised to eat unappetizing things beforehand, boiled turnips were a contender, or to refrain from reading exciting books. Detective fiction didn't fare so well. Dickens was too thrilling in some upper-crust circles. Historians to this day argue if this was simply snobbishness or genuine terror of plot developments. Let's take a break here to enjoy a semi-official recipe that is found in an 1864 domestic handbook titled Health at Home. For sleeplessness, retire not later than 9:30. Consume warm milk with shavings of nutmeg, and rest the eyes on nothing brighter than a beeswax candle. Think only of serene pastures, or gently babbling book passages without contradiction. Yes, indeed, a book that never quarrels with itself, which somehow does sound relaxing and deep down repressed. Your physician, now busy cleaning his spectacles, has one final bit of good counsel. He suggests that you position yourself so that your feet point away from the fireplace into a naturally rising hill. He is unsure what to advise individuals who reside in cities where one cannot presume a pre-existing slope. You don't laugh. One shouldn't. It's a pre-melatonin gummies, telephone-in sleep meditation era. It's an epoch where one had to concentrate to fall asleep. for a period of 1 or even several hours. Upper-class people, those rare sleepless aristos with embroidered pillow slips and powdering chambermaids, had a range of medically sanctioned tricks to choose from. There were sleeping draughts, usually concocted from laudanum, a concoction of opium and wine, but with the delightful side effects of dependency and fits of sudden poetic passion. Take 1 or 2 too many, and you'd be waking up 3 hours later attempting to compose a sonnet to your ceiling pipe. But even with the milder remedies, Victorian sleep remedies were experimental. Just take the soothing chair, a cushioned contraption that would rock you softly like a grown-up cradle until you passed out. Luxury homes would occasionally keep one tucked away in a corner of the drawing room, softly thumping a bearded uncle into a post-meal reverie. Then, the sleep helmet, really an invention to cover one's entire head with a dark blackened cover to shut one off from sound and light like a portable coffin. These were voluntarily worn. One should also recall that medical practice in Victorian times found itself in a curious crossroads, stagnating between ancient humoral theory and 19th century science, but inevitably drifting off to sleep somewhere in between. Certain brain function theories, offered with monocle and dash of Latin, were little more advanced than herbal lore learned via your aunt's cousin's neighbor. One fringe idea that was well known for roughly 20 minutes of a century held that you could be cured of insomnia because you had too much electricity in your body. Cure? Sitting down with copper mats that were grounded or sleeping with negative charge shoes dangled off the end of your bed frame, dangling like very dejected slippers. All the while, the doctor is busy jotting down lines with a leather-bound notebook, urging you to remember what exactly you had luncheon on Tuesday the 14th. You don't. He is scribbling away faster. That is never a good sign. Then comes the sage piece of advice nobody wants to hear. You might be reading too much in bed. It was a bad habit decried by most doctors of the era as a habitual elevation of mental strain, if undertaken by candlelight or worst of all, by women. Women were often admonished for insomnia, as if books were some sorts of subversive gateway to nightmares about freedom and agency. Yowza. Books were okay, apparently, as long as they were Bible passages, moral treatises, or gardening guides. Victorian Pansy's treatise upon provincial fertilizer ratios is guaranteed to knock out even the most recalcitrant frame of mind. And if none of that helps to any degree, then they recommend a dash of lettuce water. Boiled salad. But we shall get to that shortly. One last closing commentary. Some Victorian doctors did care, irrationally or not. Sleep studies, as they were, struggled with a new idea that sleep might be about calming the mind, exercising the body, rather than merely indulging moral tendencies. Perhaps it wasn't your own fault, but still, it had to be your own doing. You're back in your room now, a dim and modest space lit by a flickering oil lamp that's both comforting and somewhat flammable. Your host has asked you to prepare your nightcap, reminding you that the Victorian definition could range widely between drinks and garments, depending on context and class. Tonight, we're delving into the often overlooked world of beverages meant to help you sleep, gently, respectfully, and sometimes questionably. Nightcaps. Not quite meals, not quite medicine, but always a ritual. What's the simplest version of a Victorian nightcap? Warm milk, sometimes sweetened, sometimes spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon, and ideally consumed in near silence as you think about the moral tone of your dreams. Milk was thought to calm the nerves, coat the stomach, and counteract mental excitability, a common label for people who struggled to fall asleep or had strong opinions. But things could get more elaborate. A step up in sophistication was posset, a slightly curdled blend of milk and wine or ale, served hot, thickened with bread crumbs or egg yolk, and enjoyed with the hope of a peaceful night, or, at the very least, a distraction from the fact that you hadn't slept. Posset dates back to earlier centuries, but saw a small revival in Victorian households, often spiced with cloves, honey, or crushed almonds. The texture was described as soothingly thick. Historians still debate whether that means delicious or questionable. The British even had a term for bedtime habits like this, taking one's last comfort. It combined medical preparation, emotional soothing, and spiritual calm. That sounds lovely in theory, until you realize that some nightcaps were laced with enough alcohol to stagger a pirate. Fortified port wine often appeared in sleep guides, recommended at 3 tablespoons, to be taken precisely 10 minutes after the last bell has rung. Why 10 minutes? No one really knows. Perhaps this was the average time to get into bed without tripping over your embroidered slippers. Continuing on our exploration of unusual sleep aids, you come across lettuce. Yes, boiled lettuce water. This may be the most iconic and oddly enduring insomnia remedy of the Victorian era. Its appeal lies partly in its practicality. Lettuce was widely available. Parsnips required more effort. Poppies needed excuses. But lettuce? You could easily take some from your own garden without raising eyebrows. To make it, you would take a healthy handful of green, leafy lettuce, the older, the better, we're talking frilly despair lettuce, and boil it gently in water until it smelled a bit like a salad having a midlife crisis. Then, strain the water into a cup and drink it lukewarm, ideally while closing your eyes and pretending you hadn't just brewed your dinner's garnish into soup tea. And why lettuce? This goes back to ancient Greek and Roman beliefs in the cooling effects of certain vegetables. Lettuce was seen as cold and moist, traits believed to calm the choleric humors and settle a restless spirit. Victorian thinkers, always recycling history, revived this idea under a polished veneer of naturalism. To be fair, modern science has shown that lettuce contains small amounts of lacticarium, a milky substance in the stems of specific varieties that can produce mild sedative effects. That said, you'd need to eat about 10 heads of lettuce to get the same effect as a cup of herbal tea. Give or take a cabbage. Still, it became quite popular, mentioned in home guides, newspaper columns, and even discussed among society matrons who claimed it led to tranquil dreams and a better complexion. Whether or not it actually made you look better is still debated. You probably just appeared less tired from all that hydration. You glance through one newspaper column now. Tips for the sleep-deprived household. Entries include: avoid nightly clutter. An unbuttoned waistcoat near the pillow invites nervous twitching. Gargle warm salt water if troubled by strange dreams. For those with the melancholic vapors, lettuce's water taken for 9 nights may dull the sorrow. Again, there's that mysterious precision. 9 nights. Not 8. Definitely not 10. Perhaps someone, somewhere, had a revelation on night 9 and woke up speaking perfect Welsh. Not everyone boiled their vegetables. Some found their lullabies in the dry cupboard, a sprinkle of nutmeg on toast, or a dash of caraway in milk. Spices were thought to spread pleasant aromas through the air, which sounds fancy until you realize you've just inhaled clove steam through your nose at 10 p.m. and now you're wide awake, confused, and smelling like Christmas. And what about honey? Played a minor but sticky role. Honey mixed into warm liquid, often with lemon or a bit of vinegar, was believed to soothe throat tensions, relax the palate, and generally soften the interior humors. Whether your humors were ever truly soft is between you and your GP. One fringe remedy that occasionally showed up, often among upper-class circles, involved dropping pearls into wine before bed. This wasn't to impress anyone, though it could be assumed. The idea was that the pearl powder would leach minerals into the drink, helping align one's internal magnetisms for proper rest. More likely, it just helped wipe out your budget. And if none of these worked, there was always beef tea. Yes, lovingly simmered for hours, usually by a long-suffering cook trying not to cry into the pot. Once strained, this meaty infusion was sipped slowly and praised as grounding. In truth, drinking it before bed likely distracted your body with digestion and filled your room with faint broth smells. A mixed blessing at best. So tonight, as you picture placing a delicate doily under your lettuce water glass, remember this: sleep didn't just happen in the 19th century. It was summoned, brewed, seasoned, and sometimes plated. In those rituals, however strange, there's something soothing, isn't there? Whether it's a velvet-wrapped drink or a mug of botanically questionable milk, you now get that sleep in Victorian times was less about exhaustion and more about strategy. A quiet game of chemistry and gentle determination. And you haven't even gotten to the socks yet. Let's talk about socks, but not just any socks. Let's talk about quiet socks. The phrase alone sounds like something from a Victorian etiquette manual, or maybe the headline of a small scandal involving a duchess and an underheated library. Back in the Victorian era, these socks weren't quirky accessories or last-minute thoughts. They actually played a role in an elaborate bedtime routine. Everything from the clothing you wore to the steps you took was meant to help you slip peacefully into sleep. Quiet socks were deliberately soft, muted, and even a little moral. Think of them as the complete opposite of scandalous ankles and the perfect pair for sipping boiled lettuce tea. Now, picture yourself standing by your neatly made bed. Victorian pajamas were extravagant. Layers upon layers, and if you were lucky, made of flannel thick enough to double as upholstery. Every piece had a purpose and sometimes a hint of social pressure. For instance, nightshirts were long, buttoned up to the throat, and not exactly made for comfort. Men's versions were usually plain, while women's were decorated with lace, embroidery, and a strict sense that too much joy at bedtime was unseemly. But the Victorians really worried about their feet. Cold feet were almost seen as a medical emergency. Warm feet supposedly kept your blood flowing well and set you up for dreams of gentle figments and low-toned heavenly voices. No one wanted their dreams disturbed by the sound of their own chilly toes. That's where quiet socks came in. They weren't just about warmth, they were about moving soundlessly. Padding down the hall, you couldn't risk waking Aunt Agnes with the outrageous noise of your heel against creaky floorboards. Quiet socks were hand-knit, sometimes from cashmere or thick Welsh wool stuffed with extra softness. There were even slipper socks padded on the sole just to stop what a manual once called unseemly foot stutters. Some guides, like the 1873 pamphlet A Lady's Winter Rules of Conduct, even laid out proper sock behavior. No lady should attempt descending a hardwood stair post-sunset without proper stocking tread. It is uncouth and invites domestic unrest. Imagine causing a household crisis just by trotting down the stairs in the wrong socks. The Victorians also believed socks could soak up bad moods. Seriously. Medical journals claimed that will help draw away the anxieties of the waking day right through your feet. It's either early acupuncture or just really clever marketing for socks. Still, you have to admit, there's something comforting about it. Picture yourself at your wash basin, easing each foot into something handmade and soft, shoes designed to hush your footsteps and calm your mind. It was more than just sleepwear. It was a nightly ritual. This mattered even more if you shared your room. Middle-class Victorian homes usually meant sharing bedrooms with siblings, servants, or a spouse, so silent movement was a real act of kindness. Nobody wanted to be the person whose noisy heels woke everyone up. Some stories from the time playfully teased the rules. In one novel, a fussy landlord demands bed-appropriate footwear, so his pet canary won't be startled. Clearly, he meant himself, and apparently, nothing expresses judgment quite like a pair of embroidered cat-faced slippers. Outdoors, things got even more interesting. London's early morning delivery workers wore muffled boots with padded soles, all to keep the city quiet for those still sleeping. Back then, noise at night wasn't just annoying, it was thought to be harmful for your mind and soul. The Royal Society for Better Sleep, yes, it really existed, if only briefly, even warned in a leaflet that awake disturbances after 10 p.m. might unseal the imagination and invite phantasms of fatigue. Even the help had to keep things quiet. One governess, Millicent Shaw, wrote that she was scolded not for letting the fire go out, but for running down the corridor with spirited heels. She protested. She was wearing slippers, just not very quiet ones. For the Victorians, these habits weren't silly. They set the tone for rest and relaxation. Socks were part of a bedtime ecosystem of calm and discipline. Too much noise meant too much excitement, which could lead, at worst, to a sleepless night and a bad complexion. There were even beliefs about sock color. Light blue was calming, white symbolized purity, but rarely stayed that way, and red or russet was believed to excite the blood. Green socks? Perhaps just for the oddball aunt or dramatic poet. Ultimately, bedtime attire wasn't just about comfort or preference. Dressing right was a way to show you belonged, that you understood the rules. One wrong move could mean more than just cold feet. It might signal that you didn't read the etiquette manual. But right now, just wiggle your toes under the quilt. They're cozy and clean, and maybe you don't have perfectly proper Victorian socks at the end of your bed, but they're waiting there in spirit. So tonight, in honor of all those silent slippers and thoughtful treads, give yourself a break. Let your worries go. Soxologize. And sleep. Settle in. You're not lying all the way down yet. The Victorian way isn't just flopping into bed. It's a whole gradual process. Sleep was an art back then, even if no one else was there to see it. It was all about arranging your bedroom in a way that would satisfy the invisible rules of upper and middle class good taste. Tonight, you're going to decorate sleep itself. Let's look around this room together. The wallpaper? Quiet, elegant. Somewhere between a faded pink and the color of a bishop's sigh. The carpet feels soft beneath your socks. And in the corner, the fireplace casts gentle shadows, like lullabies made out of coal and flickering light. This is how a true Victorian parlor bedroom looked. Useful, but also filled with little rituals. Some religious, some just for comfort. They believed the way a room was set up could shape your dreams or even your morals. And above all, everything was soft. Nothing too sharp or demanding for the eyes. Thick drapes, curvy furniture, lots of upholstery. This was how you told your mind it was time to wind down. Instead of a "Are you still watching?" pop-up, you listened for curtains swishing and could even imagine the furniture letting out a sigh with you. The bed really was the main event. It was usually grand, high, maybe with 4 posts or thick canopies to keep in warmth and, supposedly, decent thoughts. Mattresses were stuffed with horsehair, straw, or, if you were fortunate, feathers. But before long they were lumpy, like a bumpy map under your sheets. Sleep wasn't about being ergonomic. It was about finding the right spot for your bed. Facing away from the door was best. Pointing straight at it was seen as too harsh. Some guides even suggested putting your bed at a northeast angle to line up with the Earth's magnetic field, whether or not that crashed into the fireplace. But sometimes the real star of bedtime was the window. Victorians obsessed over airflow. A small crack in the window let in tonic drafts, and a ribbon of moonlight would fall onto your silk coverlet. Curtains weren't just for privacy. They protected you from outside influences. People judged their neighbors not by their clothes, but by the state of the curtains. And then there was the fireplace. Every proper bedroom had one. It wasn't just for heat, but for atmosphere. The gentle sound and glow of a coal fire set the mood perfectly as you lay tucked under the covers with a mug of lettuce water, which was apparently a thing. Next to you, the fire quietly illuminating the portrait of Queen Victoria on your wall. Every little item had its place. Slippers lined up just so, a warming pan with coals for your sheets, even if it was a bit risky, and best of all, rose bowls, glass dishes of dried petals by the windowsill or bed. They weren't about strong smells, just about reminding you to hush your busy mind. Scent mattered. Lavender in drawers, bay leaves under pillows, orange peels boiled and placed by the headboard. All to calm you and keep nocturnal disquietude at bay. A lovely old phrase for nighttime anxiety. Forget burglars or storms. The real crisis was an unscented pillow. It wasn't so peaceful everywhere, though. Most people in working-class homes had tiny rooms packed with whole families and little space for anything but sleep. Sometimes it was a straw mattress, sometimes a rope bed. Basically ropes and straw, which is where sleep tight comes from. If the ropes sagged, everyone rolled into the middle. Still, people got by. A scarf on the wall, a shoelace for a curtain, anything to bring comfort. Sleep might not have been fancy, but it was made as nice as possible. There were quiet midnight routines, like a slice of bread, a whispered prayer, always some weak tea or cabbage water. Little tricks helped, too. A vinegar cloth on the forehead for calm, a brick warmed by the fire for cold feet. Even the poorest families respected sleep and its powers, coming up with their own bedtime rituals and superstitions. Dreams meant something. Falling in a dream meant you were pushing too hard in life. Dreaming of horses meant sickness. Dreaming of pigs meant wealth was coming, no one sure why. To block out noise, families covered windows with rags and tapped spoons on pots before bed, simply because it was tradition. Wherever people slept, they carved out some hope for rest, even when it was just a short pause, squeezed into the busy margins of life. So, next time you snuggle into your pillow, remember those Victorian families sleeping to a bed, making the best of what they had, and treating sleep as a tiny act of rebellion at the end of each day. And, as you drift off, remember, every age has its quirky bedtime rituals, and every bit of comfort, large or small, is worth savoring. Now, about that midnight snack, let's talk about the great Victorian crumpet debate. It all begins with a tiny rumble. Nothing dramatic, just the sneaky, late-night grumble of a stomach that, frankly, feels a bit left out. You've been diligent in your preparations. Your socks barely make a sound as you move. The fire hums quietly, like an old friend sharing a secret. You've spent 24 minutes gazing northeast, conjuring up calm meadows and the glow of beeswax candles. And yet, you want a crumpet. In Victorian England, that's not just a snack. It's practically a philosophical crisis. Welcome, fellow midnight wanderer, to the surprisingly debated, curious world of late-night bites. Let's slow down. Victorians didn't call them snacks. Far too American. Their choices, light nourishment, or, if you want to earn a smile from your host, a small restorative. Taken after bedtime? Now you're crossing into treacherous territory, especially if you happen to be a lady or a lord of moderate respectability. The advice columns, as always, were ready to pounce. Oh, the opinions they had. There was Miss Lydia Weatherstone, etiquette queen of the era, who warned that eating bread or sweet things after one's last hearty meal risks spiritual restlessness. Meanwhile, the competing gentleman's improving manual suggested that a well-behaved biscuit with tea, enjoyed in peace, might just calm your nerves. So the great debate began, moral duty in one hand, a slice of toast in the other. Let's stick with the crumpet, since your stomach is voting for it. Soft, buttered, slightly chewy, the Victorian crumpet wasn't as fluffy as today's, but it had purpose. Call it a treat with just enough justification. Usually toasted on an iron grate and slathered with butter. Salty if you were upstanding, jammy if you were a rebel. It was always eaten by candlelight. Now, paint the picture. You, clad in a faintly mothball-scented nightgown. One candle flickers, the hallways are hushed. You sneak kitchenwards in socked feet. No clacking heels, please. Drawn by cravings to the warm hearth. There you find the last of the tea, still salvageable, and a slightly stale crumpet by the bread box. But waste not, want not, you warm it up, take your time. Reverence, not speed. Of course, this scene could trigger scandal. Victorians wrestled with all sorts of anxieties about appetite, not just about health, but about the soul itself. Eating at odd hours? For many moralists, a dangerous, undisciplined, even faintly wicked impulse. Indulging after dark blurred the line between need and want. Some worried it would steal your sleep. Others feared it would steal your virtue. Dr. Erasmus Gyme, a truly festive spirit, warned that the electrical churnings of midnight digestion caused wild dreams and impolite snores. Not the bedtime story you'd hoped for. And yet, people snacked. Quietly, the accepted sleep-friendly nibbles were, to put it kindly, dull, arrowroot biscuits, slivers of lean ham, watered-down barley water. Apples, oddly, were taboo. Too crisp, too likely to rouse the mouth. Some guides favored a light spoon of lemon jelly. A treat less fun when you realize Victorian jelly was often made with boiled calves' feet. Yes, really. Rest easy. By the 1880s, the upper crust brought snacks out of hiding, providing light trays for guests. Tea cakes, tiny glasses of sherry, potted meats, and water biscuits, perhaps meant to eat, perhaps just to admire. The ritual itself calmed the room, even if nobody actually nibbled. The working class did things differently. Soup reheated over embers, leftover oatcakes, sometimes just a cold potato. One coal miner wrote with fondness. Mother kept a small cup of stew back from supper, hidden under a towel, and after a day in the pit, that was better than anything from a palace. Quiet royalty, indeed. As for beverages, hot milk was the standard comfort, but beef tea, barley water, and, for the eccentric few, spiced hot lemonade made the rounds. This last was said to quiet busy minds, a goal that's never gone out of style. Some even tried stranger remedies. Madame Wexley's 1871 guide describes a nighttime chewing ritual. A slice of dried fig, half a teaspoon ginger, a shaving of elm bark, 7 slow chews. No more. Did it help? Did it spark the rise of competitive ginger biscuit clubs? The jury's still out. For all their caution, Victorians agreed on one thing: never cook bacon at night. You'd find that warning in the wildly popular evening demeanor in mixed residences. Bacon, it insisted, was distractingly fragrant and could rouse passions in single tenants. Yes, bacon was a homewrecker. Still, in homes where peace reigned, the nighttime tray became art. Picture a plate of toast slumber offering tucked beneath a handkerchief, perhaps by a kindly aunt, perhaps never confessed to the household. If you were lucky, a scoop of quince jam atop a scone, eaten at the window, moon overhead, heart at rest. No approval needed, just understanding. So tonight, if drowsiness taps you on the shoulder, give in. Let the crumpet toast, let the butter melt. Forget the naysayers and their beef jellies. Sometimes, a little midnight snack is the gentlest form of rebellion. With your hunger soothed and your spirit perhaps a shade more content, you slip back beneath the quilt. Ahead, chiming clocks and all the curious reasons Victorians hated them. You hear it coming. A quiet tick, then another, a growing chime echoing through stone halls and polished staircases. For 5, and suddenly time is the enemy. It's the clock. Always the clock. Victorian sleep and timekeeping, a tangled affair to say the least. Back in your cozy room by the fire, you glance up. There's your clock of virtue, ornate if you're wealthy, modest and slightly off-kilter if you're not. No matter the style, every Victorian clock did more than tell you the hour. It kept score. Before clocks went digital and mute, they were living things, clicking, clunking, taking up space in the home like a cat with opinions, reminding you to eat, pray, change your undergarments, sleep, and above all, sleep properly. But more than that, the clock challenged you. Were you sleeping the right way? Before industry and gaslight, people slept in 2 stretches. After sunset, then again after the watch, a midnight break. But as days got longer, thanks to factories and social climbing, that pattern faded. Sleeping straight through became the picture of virtue, and clocks got smug about it. Urban life began turning itself around the relentless tick of the hour. Shift bells, dinner chimes, bedtime reminders, all dictated by the tyranny of time. What began as second nature turned into schedule. Miss your 10:30 bedtime? The clock marked it for you. Every minute a reminder you'd slipped up. In 1887, an essay called Moral Arithmetic insisted, time lost in tossing at night must be paid back in early rising or extra prayer. Imagine your smartwatch saying that. Clocks weren't subtle. Mantle clocks gonged on the hour, grandfather clocks boomed through the night, and pocket watches spread anxiety beyond the hearth. Even in tenements you'd hear next door's alarm, while in manors, 17 clocks chimed at disorderly intervals, a constant reminder you were failing at sleep. The ultimate sleep gadget? The pillow clock, meant to rest beside your head, ticking away until, ideally, you drifted off. Sounds peaceful unless you can't sleep and then you're just counting ticks. 1, 2, 73, dawn. Some people had clock-related quirks. Lord Barrington, a minor noble, kept 12 clocks in his bedroom, each a minute ahead of the last, humbling, he claimed. His third wife was not convinced. Too many clocks sparked whole new theories about time anxiety insomnia. As writer Evelyn Rankit put it in 1891, the soul may ache beneath the tyranny of measurement. Let quietude reclaim the night. Some sleep guides even recommended removing all clocks from the bedroom. Let the moon be your hourglass, wrote one philosopher. Others suggested wrapping clocks in cloth to muffle ambition, because in so many ways ambition was blamed for sleepless nights. Workaholic men were told to take valerian root. Thoughtful women were told to fold linens until the mind quieted. The clock always accused you, it never apologized. Poorer homes, until late in the century, went without clocks. People's sleep followed public time. The mill whistle, the street lamp, the distant clatter of the morning meat cart. With no tick to judge, perhaps sleep came easier until clocks got cheap and ticking invaded everywhere. One London social worker noted, after the Darbys bought their first timepiece, Mrs. Darby apologized for being tired at 6:11. Clocks defined productivity but never gave permission to rest. That Victorians had to decide for themselves. Can we blame the clock for everything? Not quite. Sure, clocks brought order to work and travel. But in a dark Victorian bedroom, as 12 chimes echoed like ghostly coughs, is it any wonder some people draped them, muffled them, even tossed them out the window and insisted it was a wind of moral instinct? So, in your own room tonight, the clock above the hearth ticks away, neither bossy nor boastful, just present. Maybe tonight it helps you, walking in time with your breath, leading not to worry but to dreams. Let it tick, but not too loud, because up next, Victorians and the complicated art of napping, whether with pride or just a touch of shame. It's mid-afternoon or early evening, when everything takes on that gentle, golden glow, and life itself slows down for a blissful moment. The fire's smoldering low, the air faintly scented with tea and well-loved old furniture. And if I'm honest, you look absolutely ready for a nap. And you know what? Back in Victorian England, napping was more than okay. It was actually a kind of social litmus test. Come on, let's nap through this bit of history together. Shall we? You settle onto a sagging settee, with its lion's paw feet and a cushion so flat, it probably hasn't felt plump since the Crimean War. Keep in mind, you can't just flop flat here. No, no. You recline politely, posture just so, one ankle perfectly crossed over the other. Maybe you get a blanket, but snoring? Absolutely not. This was napping for the respectable sort. It wasn't so much about resting as about maintaining your afternoon dignity with your eyes closed just long enough. For the upper middle and upper classes, the window for napping was narrow but genuine. Midday repose was tolerated, even encouraged. If you were an older gentleman, a thoughtful writer, an unwell spinster, or simply someone with digestive softness. Women could nap too, but only quietly, and only after referring to it ahead of time as a necessary restoration. If you had a title, say, Lord Baron or a plump retired admiral, you could nap sans guilt on your fancy chaise longue, a padded stretch of couch, overflowing with tassels and basking in the glow of the gas lamp. This was the kind of nap you could brag about later, called a strategic breath of inactivity. But here's the catch. Intentionally planned naps?
Totally fine.
Accidental naps? That suggested a lack of self-control or, heaven forbid, shabby upbringing. Working-class naps were a different beast. No parlors for them. Naps happened wherever a tired body could fit. A lone stair-step, a chair, or maybe a sack of onions. For factory workers, 5 quiet minutes squeezing in a nap crouched on a stairway was all you got. Coal men loitered by their wagons. Mothers dozed on benches with a cabbage resting between their knees. No one called it a nap, it was survival, just grabbing a few moments before facing the next round. Meanwhile, people were quick to judge rest at the bottom of the social ladder. The more working class you were, the more suspect your need for sleep became, particularly if anyone caught you in the act. Raise those neighborly eyebrows. Time for pamphlets on productivity and diligence. Sleep too long and you were lazy. Sleep in public? You must be uncontrollable. Even social reformers wagged their fingers. Dr. Benjamin Willoughby warned that the impromptu sofa drop is the gateway to economic decline. You almost want to take a delicious, drooly nap just to spite him. Napping popped up in literature, too. Dickens adored sleepy sidekicks. Mr. Pickwick, Mrs. Gamp, Lord Emsworth were champion snoozers, usually in the middle of feather boas or right as the plot thickened. Even Sherlock Holmes occasionally took an intense, dramatic nap to think harder. Victorians saw naps as a sign of eccentricity, mystery, or old-fashioned frailty. Even cats couldn't escape. Spoiled house cats daintily snoozed inside boot warmers, while alley cats were shooed like troublemakers. One children's book from 1856 showed a badly drawn ginger cat having wicked dreams of sausages and disruption. The authorities, presumably, were summoned. Among the well-off, naps were sometimes prescribed by doctors to cure everything from chronic swooning to women's mysterious fatigue, otherwise known as, "Please stop making me do housework." Medical guides claimed that these naps restored creative and spiritual faculties. For some, it was all the justification needed to lounge a bit longer. But just falling asleep unexpectedly? Embarrassing. Dozing off at church, in a carriage, or during high tea was a no-no. Not that it didn't happen. One Lord Alfred P. reportedly face-planted into a custard tart at a temperance luncheon, to the delight of everyone but himself. There were entire decorating trends built around the perfect nap, the fainting couch, for example. The trick was always to look as if you just drifted off in a wave of deep thought, never because you'd had 3 servings of pudding. Nap length? 17 minutes, the etiquette books declared. Any longer and you'd be late for supper. In short, Sleep was a social performance, an act judged in duration, decorum, and furniture style. Still, even the fussiest clock seemed to forgive the power of a good nap. So go ahead, curl up on your imaginary chaise. Let your feet hang loose. Let the lamp flicker down. You deserve to nap however you want. But before we drift off completely, let's peek at what happened after dark. Bedrooms, more than just cozy retreats, sometimes they felt like battlegrounds for the soul, especially in Victorian England. You're back in your room. It's still warm, still lavender-scented, still thick with sweet old comfort. But beneath all that peacefulness, there's tension, because nighttime for Victorians wasn't just about rest, but about the soul's safety. Sleep was a risky business. At night, you let go, drop your defenses, and your mind wanders where it will. In a society obsessed with keeping up appearances, dreams were downright suspicious. Victorians thought the mind, unleashed in sleep, might stumble into forbidden imaginative territory, full of repressed guilt, wild ideas, or, scandalously, French novels. The bedroom became a mini-spiritual theater, where some even said prayers for pure dreams, pleading, for example, not to dream about colored dancers. Nocturnal emissions were especially troubling for men, wrapped in shame and dodgy medical advice. Boys were given harnesses, prickly bands, or cold brine baths so they'd be startled awake before committing dream crimes. Girls were warned that even a stray thought, inspired by a book or a glimpse of an attractive elbow, might be their undoing. This constant surveillance of the inner mind became a kind of exhausting bedroom moralism. For some, rest wasn't restful, came with a side of guilt. There were supernatural fears, too, ghostly intruders and dangerous spirits. Some families kept herbs and Bible verses under pillows for protection, sprinkled salt on the mantle, or burned black feathers for extra safety. Some Victorians worried that dying in their sleep meant passing into the afterlife unprepared. Advice tracts warned to retire each evening as your last waking moment, which admittedly doesn't help you relax. Not all was doom, though. Some believed dreams brought divine messages. Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote about her dreams as meditative flowers, and Charles Kingsley called them sermons whispered to tired minds. Sleep, even so, was never neutral. It was always up for judgment, management, and careful curation. Your bedroom was more than a place to rest. It was a portal for your eternal soul. Maybe above your bed, there's a dream charm, just a little sewn phrase, "Return clean." This hung in many Victorian bedrooms, a wish to come back from sleep unscathed or, at the very least, unchanged. And with that, let yourself drift under the covers, hoping even your strangest dreams leave you a little lighter. Let the ghosts keep to themselves, ignore the moralists, and make your night your own. You've truly earned some untroubled rest, with nothing but stories drifting in. But wait, as we settle in, there's still more to explore. The nighttime routines, or lack thereof, of some of history's most brilliant insomniacs. Let's peek into their peculiar bedtime worlds. Tonight, you tug the quilt a little higher, the air thick with hush and just a pinch of curiosity. Because now, we're pulling back the curtain on the candlelit bedrooms and restless minds of the famously sleepless Victorians, a quirky bunch whose brains simply wouldn't clock out on command. Sure, this was an era of powdered faces and buttoned-up collars, but also of brilliant, jittery minds who conquered the world by daylight, then spent their nights waging silent battles with their pillows. So let's pay a little midnight visit to these restless legends, the writers, royals, and big thinkers, who may have been masters of their crafts, but couldn't master sleep. First, let's quietly knock on Charles Dickens's well-oiled front door. You'd imagine the man with a talent for conjuring pastry carts and orphans named Crimplewobble would be a champion sleeper. You'd be wrong. Dickens was a midnight walker, insomnia's own night owl. He'd leave home after everyone else was dreaming, gliding through London's empty streets for up to 20 miles, blending into the shadows, watching the city breathe under the flicker of gaslight. Dickens confessed, "Night thinking ruins day writing." Yet it's pretty clear his wandering nights filled his notebooks with all those unforgettable snapshots of dark alleys, street children, and overworked constables. Historians still debate whether Dickens was plagued by general insomnia or just obsessed with perfect nighttime order. But it's certain he couldn't sleep unless his bed faced north, or work if his study wasn't arranged just so. Maybe it was about control, or maybe he'd studied chaos up close and was afraid of getting lost in it. And then there's Queen Victoria. Technically, she wasn't a full-on insomniac, but she did fill hundreds of journals and letters, many scribbled during candlelit nights. After losing Prince Albert, she grew all too familiar with sleepless hours, haunted by phantom dreams in which he touched her cheek or whispered accusations. In those lonely hours, Victoria wrote more letters about horses, biscuits, grief, and court routines. She even banned things like four-poster beds at court because they reminded her too much of him. Grief, for her, played out quietly between the lines and in bedroom traditions. Flip the page and there's Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp, also the lady who rarely slept. While she reformed healthcare, invented modern nursing, and ran hospitals, she'd stay up all night, teaching, checking linens, patching reports, driven by what modern doctors might call chronic insomnia, and maybe OCD. For hours sleep if she was lucky. Once, she nodded off mid-sentence while standing. If that's not a power move, what is? On to Thomas Carlyle, the irritable essayist whose approach to sleep was intense. He built a soundproof chamber in his house. Double doors, padded shutters, walls made of cork, so he could escape the world's noise and his own racing thoughts. Sleep, he wrote, was a civil war between the gut and the ghost. His wife dubbed it the tomb without the benefit of death, and she had her own brand of insomnia. Jane Carlyle worried, wrote soft poetry in her mind, and sometimes recited algebra just to settle her nerves. Who hasn't counted equations instead of sheep? Now let's tiptoe to poet Gerard Manley Hopkins. Brilliant, quiet, and tormented by his own dreams, Hopkins saw nighttime as both threat and salvation, scribbling about whispered prayers and praying, "Oh, spare my sleep the instruments of judgment." He slept little. His poetry glowed with the weird magic of the half-awake. And finally, there's Sir George Gilbert Scott, the master architect who dreamt in blueprints, waking in a sweat over problems he hadn't even drawn yet. For him, sleep only came when not creating, a line that blurred until his waking hours bled into restless, inspired nights. The Victorians didn't think sleep was simple or just for the lazy. Work hard, burn bright, and if exhaustion ruined you, well, that was something to brag about. Their restless minds gave us books, buildings, revolutions, and a pile of bracingly odd sleep habits. So, if you can't sleep tonight, you're in remarkable company. Genius, it seems, comes with a price. Personally, I'd pick reasonably clever, very cozy, and asleep by midnight any day. But what if sleep won't come? Let's peek in that old medicine cabinet. A treasure chest of Victorian insomnia cures, all teetering between brilliance and disaster. Reach for a bottle. Dr. Bixby's calming elixir for tensions of the twilight mind. Smells like laudanum, sugar, and raisins because in Victorian times, laudanum, yes, opium and alcohol, was the sleep aid of choice for writers, mothers, horses, even babies. It worked until it didn't, leading not just to dreams, but to whole new addictions. Other options were barely safer. Bromide of potassium, put you to sleep, sometimes made your fingers numb or hair fall out. Valerian tincture, hops pillows, knockout drops in your wine, or a syrup so flowery it might make you cry in your sleep. Victorian cures ranged from questionable to eccentric. If you couldn't afford a gold-labeled elixir, Aunt Mabel's home brew might do. Gin, milk, molasses, and a bold prayer. Or visit the apothecary for a jar labeled slumber salt or spirit of ether, usually just opiates in disguise. Or try a gadget, a tilting chair to rock you to sleep or knock you flat, an air hood sack over your face to soothe your brain, or a mattress soother powered by foot-operated bellows, exhausting in every sense. Victorians meant business. If someone swore by powdered oyster shell with peppermint oil, 3 pamphlets and a magazine would promise it worked wonders. Even electricity had its moment. Sleep helmets lined with copper, mini shock therapies to calm your nerves. But in the end, no one really understood sleep. It was a mystery, so they filled it with hope and bottles and rituals and the hope that tonight, maybe, they'd finally rest. As you settle into your medicine-free bed tonight, take a moment. You're a rebel refusing the tincture. Or perhaps just lucky to have fresh air and a good mattress. Lights out, labels dimmed. May your mind gently unravel, and may you finally drift quietly into sleep. Can you feel it yet? The way your dressing gown slips a bit looser around your shoulders, the fire's glow dimming to just a faint dance behind its old iron grate, like it's breathing its final sigh for the night. The room has quieted, not because the world stopped, but because you have. Your pulse now matches this hush. Welcome to the gentle descent, because now, finally, we're unraveling. And as your breath becomes softer, we slip together into beds shaped more by ritual than by reality, deep into the last layers of a Victorian night, where cozy slippers and soft mercy await. Welcome to unraveling into quiet. No more sipping lettuce broth. No fretting about digestive morality or how many times you chewed a biscuit. The socks, rose bowl, curtain tassels, those little routines are behind you now. All that's left is you, the night, and those old comforts we hold onto after thought itself begins to fade. Let's peek back into your room. Remember how, not long ago, it overflowed with tiny details. Brass knobs, gloomy wallpaper? Now, it shimmers, hazy as memory, hard to recall the color of your dressing table. Was it plum? Moss? Does it matter? Because now there's only silence. And in that silence, contentment. This is how the best Victorian bedtime stories were woven. Not in books or letters, but in that inward quiet, passed down gently through countless generations. Minute rituals, little heirlooms not meant to control the night, but to invite it in. Remember one? A father laying a flat iron at each child's feet to warm them. A mother knitting quietly in the dark, watching over dreams. A boy crafting his own nighttime prayers, unsure of heaven but hopeful anyway. The maid, who after plumping every pillow for the family, finally tucked her own head upon a rolled apron in the corner. These weren't sleep hacks or miracle cures. They were slow, steady habits, what we'd call mindfulness now, though Victorians didn't name it. They simply lived it night after night. In the weaving, they found rest. Unraveling wasn't scary. It was an act of grace. The corset comes undone. The fire whispers. One last plate dried and stacked. The last thread snipped. That long, lazy stretch upon the sofa. The deep exhale all the children accounted for. Finally safe. You can feel it, can't you? Not just in imagination, in that world just outside your window, but also in your rail bed, here, now. It's not a different kind of sleep you're seeking. Not really. It's the same slow surrender, the same rituals that gently let you forget, the subtle permission to say, you did enough, you worried enough, you stood tall for long enough. Now you can let time unlace itself. Because in Victorian England, sleep wasn't just required. It was a winding down of the day, a graceful final bow. The closer it got to bedtime, the lovelier that winding down became. That's what a lullaby truly is. A tiny goodbye, not to people or memories, just to today. So tonight, here in your imaginary antique bed, drafts rustling under the door like half-remembered lullabies, let the rules slip away. Forget the sock order, the timings, the postures. Let it all dissolve. Because the Victorians did it, too. Even the most particular among them eventually sighed off their buttons, greeted sleep with a little bit of crooked lace. No one got it perfect. No night was flawless, but everyone kept trying. And that might be the sleepiest, sweetest tradition of all. But wait, before sleep comes, before the quilt covers you one last time, there's still one curtain left to part. Let's step into the very last chamber, softly, eyes nearly closed, where the embers finish their glow and we rest, just for a moment, among well-loved blankets and the memory of warmth. Inside a story, inside sleep. You're almost there now. Your breath is slow. The softness around you has turned your imagined flannel into something mist-like. Time seems suspended, the last drip of candle wax waiting to fall. Still, let's stay just a moment longer, because before this journey ends, we have one more thread to follow. A gentle, slow wander through the heart of the Victorian night. Let's head to the quietest part of the house. One last hour among forgotten sleep places, quilts, corners, and the secrets they carry. The grand beds with velvet and ornate boards weren't the only places people slept. Not by a long shot. Many Victorians curled up in unglamorous corners that were, for all purposes, beds. Window seats warmed in the sun by day, still holding heat at night. Children curled there, their books slipping away as they drifted off. Kitchen benches by the hearth. Servants napping on hard wood after all the dishes, before morning dough. Aprons over shoulders, eyes closed, sleeping in brief, precious spurts. There were trundles, little roll-out beds, pulled out at night and pushed away in the morning. Damp, not fancy, but they worked, especially for those whose names never got sewn into linens. Even coal cellars served as bedrooms for the poorest, newspapers for blankets, a sack for a pillow. Sleep came anyway, softening even the hardest ground. None of this was about failure, it was endurance. On the coldest floors, some of the happiest dreams were found. The upper classes liked to pretend otherwise, that real rest required a certain setting, but real life always snuck in a little rebellion. The governess dozing at her desk, the footman napping after a too long night, the matron pretending to mend while fighting sleep upright. And then the guest rooms, wide, silent, waiting, beds made up, unnapped upon, sheets flipped for nobody, pillows hardly ever touched. And if guests did come, they'd sleep beneath quilts older than the house itself. A travel writer once said, "The best sleep I ever had was beneath a quilt that smelled of old books, in a room undisturbed since the day Queen Adelaide died." There's something beautiful there. Even empty rooms can hold on to warmth. Even silence leaves a trace. Quilts themselves were stories. Maybe yours is a patchwork of old dresses, aprons, curtains, more memory than fabric. Some sewn for weddings, others stitched by candlelight, each square with a family story. To sleep beneath one is to dream of a history, not just your own but everyone else's too. Maybe your blanket's not storied. Maybe it's just warm, fresh from the chest, clean and sleep-scented. That's perfect too. Then the sleeps by the fire, never planned, always welcome. Sometimes during stories, until the words themselves lull everyone into rest. Sometimes a cheek tips into the ember's warmth. Even pets join in, snoozing under the table, chasing dream rabbits in their sleep. One memoirist remembered dozing as a child with her head on the dog's belly, lulled by its breathing. Sometimes there were little objects, tokens placed in bed just because they mattered. A heart-shaped pincushion, a battered doll, a sprig of rosemary, a ribbon for someone missed. Not miracle cures, just small comforts to soften the night. Even the roughest sleepers found solace in knowing others had struggled to sleep and tried anyway. That's where you are, isn't it? Trying anyway, wrapped in imagined quilts, drifting through remembered beds, so close to sleep you can feel your thoughts fading with the firelight. Let them go. Let the room dim. Let that last pillow adjustment be instinctive. Give yourself permission to stop worrying about the wallpaper. There's no wrong way to rest. No judgment left in this room. No echoing boots. No ticking clock to scold you. Only quiet. And in that hush, a promise. One more moment, one final thread to unwind. Come, let's leave this world the way a Victorian would. Tea finished, socks warm, soul soothed. You may hardly notice, but your journey's nearly over. The room feels velvet soft now, as if time itself has gently covered your eyes, or a soft scarf has been wrapped around your head. The sharp edges blur into gentle shapes. Where you once saw details, bedposts, lamps, the creases in your pillowcase, it all melts into a hazy comfort. This is where your thoughts slow to a gentle sway, where remembering slips into drifting. But before you slip completely into sleep, there's one last story. One we'll trace softly together, like drawing on fogged glass. It's the story of how a whole world finally, quietly, learned to let go of the day. No matter the odd tricks, the odd sock rubs, the rituals with rosewater and nonsense. Eventually, even the Victorians slept. They always did. And when they finally surrendered, it looked something like this. A woman in Derbyshire curls into her pillow. She's whispered a sleepy prayer, breathed in the lavender from her nightcap, and listens to her husband's steady breaths. He always falls asleep first, which makes her sigh. But soon she'll join him. A boy tucked into a faded blanket, handed down by his sisters. lets his feet dangle off the bed, but doesn't care. As long as the market bells stay quiet, his dreams will keep going. Tonight, he owns a coal-black horse, bigger than he is. Somewhere else, an elderly aunt sleeps mid-needlepoint. Her glasses tip down her nose, and she mutters in her sleep, revisiting old squabbles. Nobody wakes her. She's most peaceful this way. In another lamplit room, a young man who spent all day worried about curtain colors finally sinks into his bed and sighs, as if to say, "Enough, home stuff can wait." And over everyone there's a hush, not total silence, more like the whole city letting out a gentle exhale. Because even then, people understood something true about sleep. It's not a goal or a reward or a test. It's just letting go. Letting go of weight, of busyness, of the need to be anything at all. Some people might fight it, organize, fuss, stall, but eventually they too give in and drift. So now you can, too, let yourself sink back. Let fabric memory wrap around your skin. Let your breath set the rhythm. Feel your mind hiss with tiny fading sparks, like the fading crackle of a slowly dying fire. No more odd potions. No more jolting alarm clocks. No more nagging thoughts about the gas lamp or the laundry. Just peace, earned by being here simply with comfy socks and nothing left to do. And if a stray worry floats by, a little loose thread of thought, let it drift away, light as a feather in a breeze. Tonight, just tonight, you can sleep the way people have always hoped to, soft and content, when the day is really finally done. No perfection, no angels or shining examples, just rest and maybe a gentle, happy snore. Come fully into this quiet now. No errands, no questions, no rearranging dreams. Just blanket, just breathing, just stillness. Wind down, let everything slow. The story's finished. The pictures fade. Even the words themselves unwind and fall quiet, like footsteps in new snow. That familiar fire, always humming behind your thoughts, shrinks to its final, glowing embers. You can still sense its warmth, not on your skin but under your ribs, in that hush just beneath the surface. There's no need to stoke it. Let it fade, peaceful as the end of a lullaby. Your limbs relax, heavy but easy, quiet as oars drawn in from the river. Thoughts that once scurried around your mind slow, then settle, then stop, as if curtains are gently pulled together in your head, not to block out trouble, just to quiet things down. Now you've arrived not just at the end of a story, but at the far edge of effort. There's only one thing left. Nothing. Let go. Float. Forget even the meaning of floating. You're not separate from the bed, or the room, or the night anymore. You're not traveling. You are simply here, and very soon you'll be nowhere at all. Which, for tonight, is exactly perfect. Rest easy now. You've earned this drift.